What's going on, everybody? It's Robert Hall, and in today's video we are going to talk about the Godox P2400. This is a very different light than anything else in the AD series of lighting. The first major difference of the P2400 versus the rest of the AD series is that this is AC powered. This is designed to be used indoors or attached to a generator. There's really nothing portable about it. The other major difference of the P2400 is the fact that it is a dual pack and head system, meaning that this pack can power two different heads and it can control two different heads in two different groups at different powers. It's basically two lights in one. Now the P2400, that is for its peak capability of pushing out 2400 watt seconds to multiple heads, whether that be one head or two heads, but there are multiple configurations that affect the price of this kit. Now the kit that I have is two 2400 watt second heads, but that does not mean that I can connect both 2400 watt second heads and get 2400 watt seconds to each light. If we're using two heads, then the most that I can put out to those two lights would be 1200 watt seconds each for a total of 2400 watt seconds. Now, initially I had no interest in this product. When it came out, I said, don't expect a review from me, guys. This just doesn't fit my work. However, over the last year, I've taken on a lot of auto work that is outdoors, where we are having to light vehicles from long distances, show wide frames, and do so in really bright outdoor conditions. And that requires a ton of flash. But since then, I've also integrated it into other work, namely dance photography. And this is something that this really excels at, because with the added power and connection to AC output comes some crazy action stopping potential. And unlike the QT series, this thing can put out crazy speed while still having very good color. This is without a doubt the flagship offering from Godox now, and its price definitely shows that, considering that most kits hover around the $6,000 price tag depending on the heads that you get with it. Now I'm going to do some comparisons between the P2400 and the AD1200 Pro. First up, power. I did a quick test at 6 feet and using a RFT19 reflector, the P2400 at its peak brightness put out 1.1 stops more power than the AD1200 Pro. One stop was the metric to expect right there, and it delivered that. However, that extra 10th stop comes down to one of the unique features of the P2400 heads, and that is the fact that you can actually zoom in and out the bare bulb. In that same test, I moved the light in different positions, and I got anywhere from an f32 and 0.8 of a stop all the way up to f45 and 0.6 of a stop. So there was almost a full stop of power output difference depending on whether this was zoomed in or out. But this feature isn't really designed for controlling power. That's just kind of a side effect. This is designed so that you can position the bare bulb in different positions relative to the modifier. It is handy and it's welcome when you're spending $6,000 plus on a lighting setup. On to color. The AD1200 Pro is slightly more consistent when both of these lights are in their color stable mode, although the margins are very narrow here. The AD1200 Pro had zero tint across its entire board. I tested this with a C800 colorimeter, whereas the P2400 at its lowest three power settings, 1/128th, 1/256, and 1/512th, all had a 0.1 magenta correction, which means that it leans very slightly to the green, to the point where you'd be hard pressed to even find a gel to correct it. It's that minor. But you know, it still exists. It was still measurable using that C800 colorimeter. Now, before we move on to features, the last comparison I want to make between these two lights is their recycle speed. And that's somewhere where I expected the P2400 to outperform the AD1200 Pro. Because we're directly connected to AC, this is going to have an easier time drawing its power than this type of system would off of a battery. So when this is at full power, 2400 watt seconds, and the AD1200 Pro is at its full power of 1200 watt seconds, the P2400 recycles almost twice as fast. It recycles its 2400 watt seconds in about 1 second flat, whereas the AD1200 Pro takes closer to 2 seconds. And if you drop the P2400 down to half power so that they are both drawing 1200 watt seconds, the P2400 recycles in about 1/4 the time. And then that just continues across the board as you drop the power. And when you get into lower rates, this thing recycles incredibly fast.
Whenever I share a video that includes rapid fire flash, people inevitably say, it's not even going off every time. No, it is. The video just can't capture it because the flash duration is so short, which is the same reason that if you grab any single frame, the flash isn't covering the entire frame, it's only recording a few lines of the flash on a single frame at a time. It did go off every time, and here's the image sequence to prove it.
All right, let's break down the display and menu of the P2400. Most of the features have been moved into the menu system, whereas on the exterior, we pretty much just have control for the different heads. So we've got an all button that will allow us to control both of the heads. We've got a 1 and a 2 button so that we can independently control them. And then we have 2 modeling lamp buttons so that we can independently control the modeling lamps. To control a modeling lamp, once it's active with the percentage, you just hold it down and then you can change the percentage, or you can simply switch it to its proportionate mode where it will be proportionate relative to the power level of the flash. Now you've got information for the 2 different heads, such as what group they are in, what the modeling lamp's doing, what the power level is. Up here you've got the channel, and then on the bottom left corner we have the T.1 flash duration along with the watt seconds for the given power level. Up top is the color system, and you'll see other indicators pop up on top depending on some switches you make on the menus inside. The only other control on the outside is the sound button, so this will give you an audible beep if it recycles or it's warning you that it needs to be dumped in order to attain its new power level, as well as a test button that does what it's supposed to do. Beyond that, everything is in the menus. Now the color just gives you an option of whether to prioritize the color or to prioritize the flash durations. Like I said, we've got flash durations here in the bottom left corner. If we have our stable color mode off completely, we will experience the fastest T.1 flash duration. So if I drop down here to 1/512th, you can see that we have a T.1 flash duration of 1/17,850. That is this flash's peak potential of freezing action in case you are trying to photograph a moving subject and capture them very sharply. However, if we go into the standard mode, this is kind of an in-between color stable mode and freeze mode. You can see that our T.1 flash duration just dropped all the way down to 1/9,430. So we just lost about half of our action freezing potential. And if we go to optimal color, that is the best that this light can possibly maintain a consistent color temperature across its power range, then we are going to drop about half again. We're down to 1/4800. Speaking of T.1 flash durations, one thing I love about this light is that regardless of what color stable mode that you're in, whether you're in optimal, standard, or off, you have a T.1 flash duration at full power of 1/400th of a second, which is great if you have a newly released camera that has an increased sync speed, such as a Sony A1, because in order to take advantage of that sync speed with full power flash, you want that flash to fit within the 1/400th of a second that its sync speed is. If it were 1/200th of a second, you'd literally be throwing flash out the window. If you guys want to know more about that, let me know in the comments below. Next up, we have wireless. You can switch between the 2.4 gigahertz, which is the most common. You can go back to the legacy 433 megahertz system, or you can just turn wireless off altogether. Next up, you can change the channel in here. ID allows you to apply a 2-digit number that your transmitting device would also have to match in order for your flash to fire. It's great if you're using it with other Godox users around and you don't want them triggering your lights, or you're trying to avoid your light being affected by other wireless devices. Socket 1 and Socket 2 group are simply the groups for each socket. So this system is effectively 2 lights, and therefore in order to control them, you need to assign each a group. Next up, we have the receiver option. This is for the optical receiver right here on the right hand side. If we have it off, it's not going to be looking for any signals to flash from other flash units. If we use S1, it's going to fire automatically as soon as it sees another flash. And if we have it on S2, it's going to ignore pre-flashes from TTL systems. The modeling lamp control has 2 settings. We can have continuous, which will keep the modeling lamp on at all times. The interval setting, on the other hand, will turn the modeling lamp off when the flash fires, and it won't turn back on until the light has completed recycling. Backlight simply controls the brightness of the display backlight. Delay allows you to delay the flash down to the millisecond. The main purpose of this would be for use with hypersync, if you were trying to get hypersync out of the system, which I've got a video tutorial on if you want to watch that. Or if you were trying to align it with some type of older system. If you're not trying to do one of those 2 things, I suggest that you have it off That way your timing isn't getting messed up. Next we have Unites, which I honestly think is supposed to be units, but this is for the alt masking system, which I've made a dedicated video on. It's something that you can use to create very easy masks when doing product photography, specifically when doing product photography on pure white, but there's all sorts of creative applications as well. And that's what these next two, 1 alt and 2 alt, are designed for as well. Step, we can use an integer step scale or we can use fractions. So if you prefer the integer scales similar to Pro Photo systems, then you can easily do that. Now we can go in here and just see these large numbers instead of the fractions. I prefer the fractions, is what I've used my whole life. Multi allows you to control stroboscopic mode, so to control the hertz and total flashes from on the display or just turn it on in general. Recycle, we have multiple settings for recycle here. We have standard and max. Now this doesn't affect color. This does not affect T.1 flash durations. All this affects is the recycle speed. So you might be wondering, if there's no other effect other than the recycle speed, why would I use anything but max? If you are trying to use the P2400 away from a standard AC socket, that means you're going to be using either a generator or some type of portable battery. I'm personally using a Delta battery system in order to power this when I'm on location. If you stay in max, the power surge, when it tries to draw power, just fill back up immediately, is extremely high, such that you need a very, very powerful battery or generator to keep up with it. Otherwise, you'll just overdraw the device that's powering it. If you're using standard, it's a little bit slower in terms of recycle speed, but the power surge is way lower, allowing you to use a lower powered generator or lower powered battery. Next page, we have language, and obviously we want Chinese, and no! After language is reset, you can reset to all the defaults, and times is how many times this light has been fired. The only other thing to cover here is the large carrying case that's included. It's a wheeled carrying case that is very deep, so this thing is definitely a chore to get in and out of a vehicle, but it will store the pack as well as up to 2 heads, and there's multiple dividers in there to compartmentalize everything, as well as a zippered pouch on top. The case is pretty well built. It's similar to the construction quality of the newer LED products, which are much stronger designs than you would have found on Godox cases previously. It's got a hard outer shell, so nothing can get easily hit. It would have to take a really substantial hit on the case in order to be concerned about any of the lights on the inside. So, who is this light for? I think you have to have one of 3 concerns in order to even consider a light of this type. One would be you just want crazy output. You're doing something where 1200 watt seconds isn't enough, and there's not many scenarios where 1200 watt seconds isn't enough. You have to be able to live with that AC component or be ready to pay even more to have some type of battery or generator with it. The second reason would be you are very concerned about freezing action and you need something with a fast flash duration. The AD1200 Pro, again, already a beast in this regard, but this is about 40% better on the lower end of its power range. So that just means that you can either get more output at the same T.1 flash duration, or at equivalent outputs be getting 40% faster T.1 flash durations, either of which are going to allow you to stop action more efficiently. The third and final reason would be that you need to shoot at an absurd frames per second. Maybe you're doing something like I was, where I was trying to freeze water in the air and I wanted a lot of opportunities to capture it. That's where being able to shoot at a ridiculous recycle speed to keep up with those ridiculous frames per second, that comes in handy. Now, I'm not trying to say that lights like the AD1200 Pro or AD600 Pro, even lower than that, are slow at recycling. They are certainly really quick at recycling, but they just aren't fast enough to keep up with some of those 20 frames per second demands at their mid-range power levels, and this is. One thing I will say, having used the P2400 for quite a few shoots now, is that it just makes everything else feel so tiny, and you really do appreciate the capabilities of a unit like this and accept the restrictions of being connected to some form of AC power just to see the sheer power and speed that it can deliver. Now, if you're not taking advantage of that, there's no reason to consider this light. I think that all the lights in the AD series have a really ideal user, and it's about finding that one that satisfies your power and flash duration needs while not being bigger than you want to use. And that's the ideal thing here. So this just creates an all new level for that at the top of the power range. for Godox. So it's really cool to see, and I'd really like to see how this stacks up to something like a Pro Photo pack and head unit. Hopefully I can do that in the future. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope this answered all your questions on the P2400. And if you'd like to see any additional videos, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Thanks, I'll catch you in the next one.